Hi, folks. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, morning. Let's assemble and get started here. I'm Alan Hutner, and I am the host producer of Transitions Radio Magazine, amongst other things, based out of Santa Fe and on 98.1 FM on Sunday mornings, 8 to 11 a.m. on the radio, and also live streaming at www.transradio.com. Thank you. Part of the reason that I'm here is because of the radio and knowing Clifford Carnicom and the Carnicom Institute of late. And I think I want to just tell a little story that's part of the welcome and part of the introduction. In 1999, I was given a cassette tape of an interview that aired on Coast to Coast, which was then hosted by Art Bell with a journalist, William Thomas. And it was about what was then called chemtrails, the aerosol spray, illegal aerosol sprays. That is more Clifford's term for it. And kind of blew my mind. I had this resistance to even believing that something like that is possible. But being a radio journalist, I thought it was appropriate to explore it deeper. And I found my way to Will Thomas, and he ended up doing an interview on the radio show. And again, this goes back to early 1999. I think it was maybe March. And the reason I'm going to interrupt that conversation is this unbelievability of this. And I have a feeling most of you have gone past your resistance. You're not members of the uninitiated to what's happening in terms of modifications and interference to the natural order of things on the planet. We can take the ideas that there are certain toxins in the water, in the soil, in contemporary mass-produced food and agriculture. We know that there is a correlation. There's a correlation between our health and our wellness and what's happening in the environment on those levels. But some of the material you're going to hear today, some of which I know, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, is very difficult to digest if you're a, quote, mainstream person. This is new. Like I said, I don't think this is new to most of you, so I would just suggest to be open and allow the material that's going to be presented over the next 2 days to not be prejudged by whatever the programming and the patterns of our mind and our subconscious is, because we have a tendency to resist things. I happen to know from a number of interviews with Clifford over the years and other people that there is even in me, there's an unbelief that this is real, that this is happening to us individually and to the planet as an entity, Mother Earth. And I know sometimes we go into fear, and then if our health is affected, we've got to deal with the physiology of what's going on. So, and a little later on today, I might speak to the wellness aspects of who you are and keeping your immune system up without the supplements necessarily, although they're important, and the various treatments, whether they're conventional medical, complementary, alternative, which we also need to do to keep our bodies and our minds and our physiology healthy. So I'm also, as I look out there at this sellout crowd, I'm thinking this is also a very microcosmic representation of the level of where human consciousness is right now. This is the way people are showing up for levels of truth and awareness. So, you know, I won't go into percentages. I want to acknowledge you for being part of those who are willing to stand up and be heard, listen, do Q&A. But overall, and we are in a great time of shift. Things are changing very, very rapidly, and I know you're feeling it in your body, in your mind, in timelines, perceptions, and it's real. And there is a call that's going on right now for people to wake up to who they truly are. We're more than our egos and our personas and our physical bodies and our names and our jobs and our careers. And if we don't get to the core of that in some way, individually and collectively, we're going to have some real problems. As one futurist, Barbara Marx Hubbard, says, we are in an evolutionary spiral where there's a gap. Sometimes it's not smooth and easy, and you have to jump across these gaps. And we are in a gap place right now. And she says, evolve or die. So as a human species, cohabitating with other living forms on the planet, we have threatened ourselves to even exist collectively. I'm an optimist, and I think we're going to get through this. I think there's a lot of people waking up right now to what is really happening. First of all, you have to recognize, who am I? There's ancient sages and teachers and saints. The teachings have been universal. They found their way into different religions, philosophies. But if you don't know who you are, and your life is dictated by a mind that is programmed and has been conditioned based on belief systems that have been passed on for eternity, there's a problem. And like I said, maybe a little later on, Clifford's giving me 10 minutes in the afternoon, I might go more into that. But I want to just set the context. I want to welcome everybody. I want to acknowledge the minority relationship and percentage to the world at large of 7 billion people. And I would say, how many of those 7 billion really know what's going on in terms of the atmosphere, of man-made interference, of geoengineering, which you're going to hear about, biological interference, and of course, all the PR spin that says the industrialization of our society and the affluence in our environment have not affected our health and wellness. There's not that proof. Of course, the PR firms and PR people are easy to buy. If they're bought, they'll say almost anything, as scientists will too. So, just briefly, I have a couple more minutes. 1999 again, my mind is blown. Not only am I hearing about this spraying, I'm hearing in that year about The Biggest Secret from David Icke, who has been on the radio show a number of times. His material is hair-raising also. It moves into conspiracy theory, the oligarchy, plutocracy, the very wealthy and affluent few who may be pulling the strings on 7 billion, well, maybe 6 billion, 800 million puppets. So this is a wake-up time. And after doing a few shows, we had gatherings. This is after Transitions Radio Magazine. We had gatherings on Sundays at the Oasis restaurant that started out with about 10 or 12 people. That's when I first met Clifford, maybe within 2 or 3 weeks after airing some of this material. That group eventually grew to 50 or 60. We moved into another place. An organization was formed called Skywatchers, very active, and that culminated with an event at the James A. Little Theater with about 350 people showing up. And things were activated. We went to, at the time, Congressman Udall, and presented a loose leaf book of 6 inches of material saying what was going on. More people are aware of what's happening that you're going to find out about in the next 2 days. It's going to be updated, and I think our mission is to educate ourselves, to not necessarily believe things, what's a direct knowing, what your intuition tell you, as opposed to your mind, although your mind is a tool of your intuition and yourself. Clifford has been a friend, as well as Carol, his wife, for now 12 years. I know him to be a very honorable man. The Carnicom Institute has impeccable goals and missions based on his impeccability. And so I welcome him to the podium here to begin the conference. And thank you again for coming. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Clifford Carnicom. I want to thank each of you for being here today and that you've chosen to spend your time and energy here. I think we probably have quite a bit of work ahead of us for the next couple of days. If you're willing to be engaged, it's the first time that I have set up anything of this magnitude and this duration and this length with a group of people. You're free to come and go as you please. But if you are here today and tomorrow, I suspect we will be digging in and working pretty hard if you'd be willing to do that. I would like to thank the folks that made this possible here. We're very fortunate to have this room for us for this weekend. I would like to acknowledge Steve viewers. We would not be here without Steve's help. Also, Alan Hutner made that original connection with me to even have the possibility of having access to a venue for us. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of the members of our organization. We are a very small organization. There's no secret about that. And we need help. But we're here. And I'd like to acknowledge those folks that have helped make this organization start and grow to what it is now and has pulled you here. And then also we have quite a group of volunteers here today that have also helped in many important ways. So with that being done, what I'd like to do to start today is we're going to watch a revision of a documentary that I made. Many of you may be familiar with the documentary that I made in 2005. That documentary took about 1.5 years of my life and was made with a budget of about $400 and about a 7-year-old computer. But it was done. And that document still holds. That documentary is about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes long. At this point, I have no means to retract a single line within that documentary 6 years ago. I would show that documentary in its entirety today, and my perception of the information in that documentary and understanding of that information would not change in any significant way whatsoever. What we're going to watch today is an offshoot. It is essentially that same documentary, but it is a revision. It will only be about 45 minutes long. And we have this documentary also through a gift These folks will remain anonymous, but about 3 years ago, this is actually belated, what's going on here. About 3 years ago, when I gave a talk in Los Angeles, I had some folks approach me, and they offered to make a second run on this documentary, to make a shorter version available for the public for those that don't necessarily have the maybe long-winded approach that I might tend to have. And so they offered to make a shorter version, a little bit scaled to a lay audience, and maybe reduce a little bit of the technical aspects of it. And they produced this. And it took these folks a year and a half of their volunteer time to edit the documentary to this version. They both still stand. They both are still available. This one is meant for us to have an introduction to this subject without taking an hour and a half. And we have, I guess, a desire for me to move a little bit, and so I'll do that occasionally. I tend to wander, as you'll see, so it'll be a challenge for any cameraman. So we're going to start with that and relax. Actually, I did intend to take a break. I'd still like to take just at least a couple minutes after, just to think about what you've seen, because it's a bit heavy. The weekend's going to be a bit heavy for some of us. But if you'd like, and by the way, I have only seen this documentary one time, so this is actually almost as much of a surprise for me as it is for you. But I would like to thank those folks that did this in the background that will never be known by their name for what they've done for us. So hopefully we can get this documentary running, and thank you.
For most people, a clear blue sky is a comforting sight. Indeed, of all the familiar sights in our life, the sky provides the reassurance that all is right with the world. But as with all things with which we grow comfortable, we sometimes take the sky for granted. Here is your sky, clear, blue, and limitless. Here is another view of your sky, this time dotted with clouds. And here also is your sky, and those now common trails. Is there any difference between this kind of airplane trail and these trails? Obviously, these easily observable trails are not natural cloud formations. They can be seen on any given day to come from airplanes. They are man-made and dissipate rapidly in the sky. These too are man-made and come from planes. But these trails linger, collect, and eventually cover the entire sky. Is there any difference between these clouds and these clouds? Between these trails and these trails? Why haven't we noticed them before? And why isn't anybody talking about them? In the early part of 1999, an immense operation began, an operation that many of us would find difficult to accept were it not so well documented. This operation has involved a dispersal of massive amounts of fine materials into our atmosphere. and the implications of these actions are as grave and far-reaching as they strain the limits of understanding. Should you ask the authorities, there will be counterclaims to the evidence presented here, and you may be told that all is normal, and as it should be. You may be told that there is nothing to be concerned about, and that everything is as it always has been. Your eyewitness accounts may be dismissed as unreliable, despite the fact that what you have observed is in direct contradiction to fundamental natural laws and your own common sense. From this point on, we urge you to look for yourself, use your own judgment, and reach your own conclusions. What you are seeing now is quite normal. These temporary trails are called contrails, which is a word formed from the words condensation and trails. They are made of water vapor, and they are a common and natural occurrence, which happens as a result of aircraft flying at high altitudes, in particular ordinary weather conditions. You can see that the condensation disappears fairly quickly, much like your breath on a cold winter day. The aircraft at the upper portion of the screen leaves a normal contrail, which vanishes as any trail of water vapor will. To contrast, beneath it is an aircraft emission that is thick, continuous, and persistent. The environmental conditions accompanying each trail are not exceptionally different from one another, and yet the result and impact from each is entirely different. The only logical way this could occur is if the two trails themselves had very different qualities, and indeed they do. The majority of the footage that you are now seeing has been filmed in the high desert regions of New Mexico. This is an arid, dry environment with very low humidity levels. Contrails are very common here because they form easily in a low humidity, dry environment. Cold and dry conditions, exactly those conditions normally found in the upper atmosphere, are extremely favorable to contrail formation. The humidity levels of the upper atmosphere are relatively low. For a normal cloud to materialize, two fundamental elements must exist: particles such as microscopic dust and moisture. Unlike contrails, clouds cannot form well in especially clean air. They require particles that act as a base for water vapor to cling to. The size of these particles must be extremely small, less than 1/100th of the width of a human hair. The other essential component for normal cloud formation is a humidity level of about 70% or more. Notice that the requirements for cloud formation and contrail formation are entirely different from one another. Clouds need moisture and fine particles for the moisture to cling to, and contrails need the opposite: clean, dry air. This is because they are based upon entirely different natural laws. An aerosol is a substance made up of solid particles suspended either in a liquid or a gas, and in this case we can consider our own atmosphere to be a gas. Because in addition to the normal existence of clouds and contrails, aerosol sprays are being emitted from aircraft flying at high altitudes. Aerosols in the air can be seen in two primary forms: as an emission from aircraft and as a collection of suspended particles in the atmosphere. A suitable term for this collection of aerosols is an aerosol bank. It is known now that these persistent trails, known commonly as chemtrails, from the words chemical and trails, are not predominantly water vapor, like contrails, but are primarily solid in nature, because of the sheer volume of particulate matter they contain. By simply looking up and observing the skies, one can now regularly see with the naked eye aircraft repeatedly dispersing materials into the upper atmosphere at altitudes of roughly 35 to 45,000 feet. These materials expand rather than evaporate, and they usually transform gradually into a uniform haze that has, in recent years, tremendously decreased our general visibility and has altered the deep blue of our skies into a pale blue or dirty white. Although it might be witnessed in any given period, this commonly now occurs during times of very low humidity, on the order of 30 to 40%, instead of the 70% or greater that is required of natural cloud formation. And so we know now that these are not clouds in any conventional sense. They are a unique and artificial creation. These aerosol emissions are now well entrenched into our air supply. These changes in the very air we breathe have a fundamental impact upon all life on this planet, and these aerosol operations, by their very nature, violate the most basic human rights. These operations are being conducted without your knowledge or your informed consent. They affect your life, the lives of everyone you know and love, and the future of life on the planet. We all consider a clean blue sky and healthy air as our birthright, a source for joy, and it remains at the very core of our existence. What we are discussing here is more than just some dry scientific facts. We are talking about the experiences, health, and quality of life itself. Who is doing this? In 1999, a website, Carnicom.com, was created by scientist and researcher Clifford Carnicom to call attention to the aerosol operations being observed over the southwestern desert skies of the U.S. The developer of that site, Clifford Carnicom, is a former federal employee with no political or environmental notoriety. Within a matter of days of the launch of his website, it became apparent that it was being closely monitored by high-level government organizations and military agencies, including the Pentagon, National Security, Intelligence and Emergency Agencies, the U.S. Senate, defense contractors, chemical and pharmaceutical companies, weapons and defense contractors, health organizations, and the media. The interest demonstrated by these various organizations in the website was documented for a period of several months. Despite their obvious keen interest, these same organizations have carried on a campaign of continuous dismissal of the urgency of the issue and a refusal to publicly investigate it. A wide variety of examples can be found of government and military officials who have denied the existence or importance of aerosol operations. Many of these denials contain within them identical words and phrases. August 2000, Lieutenant Colonel Michael K. Gibson, U.S. Air Force, said, "The chemtrail hoax has been investigated and refuted by many established and accredited universities, scientific organizations, and major media publications." Colonel Gibson gave no specifics. In 2001, Colonel Walter M. Washabau, U.S. Air Force, said, "The chemtrail hoax has been investigated and refuted by many established and accredited universities, scientific organizations, and major media publications." Colonel Washabau also gave no specifics. Charles H. Taylor, representative from North Carolina, Senator Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico, Representative Mike Thompson of California, and U.S. Senator Richard Lugar all responded to concerned constituents that they had been assured by the military and other government sources that nothing was amiss. In one of these responses, it was stated that, although there may be the appearance of an aerosol operation, this is not the case. Furthermore, Senator Lugar stated that the Federal Aviation Agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency, and academic professors have examined the aerosol operation claims only to find that they have been made by disreputable sources who do not provide evidence or data. This, despite the fact that volumes of data and material samples have been provided to the EPA and are available on the Carnicom website, as well as others. There have been many reports and inquiries regarding aerosol operations from concerned citizens to Carol N. Browner, then administrator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Her response was to repeatedly assert that the EPA was unaware of any activities to release chemical or biological substances into the atmosphere by aircraft. In January of 2000, a certified letter, including a physical sample of highly unusual airborne fibrous material, was sent to Ms. Browner with a request that the EPA identify the material on behalf of the public welfare. Despite several follow-up inquiries, the EPA gave no acknowledgement of receipt of that material. When independent researchers during that time then discovered unusual biological components within that same sampling of material, concerns grew regarding the importance of a full and official response to the samples by the EPA. 1.5 years after the original submission, in June of 2001, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency finally acknowledged the receipt of the unusual fibers of physical material. This acknowledgement only occurred after a formal Freedom of Information Act inquiry. However, though receipt of the sample was acknowledged, the EPA refused to identify the sample, stating that it was not the policy of this office of the EPA to test or otherwise analyze any unsolicited samples of material or matter. In October of 2000, a series of more than 1,000 petition letters of concern were sent to Carol Browner as an indication of the significant citizen concern on the aerosol issue. In December of 2000, the EPA responded once again that they continued to remain unaware of any aerial application of chemical or biological substances that may have any adverse effect upon the population. In November of 1999, the Attorney General of New Mexico, Patricia Madrid, acknowledged multiple inquiries to her office regarding unusual aircraft operations. She declared that there is substantial evidence that the activity and contrails are well within the range of normal aerial activity. After issuing this notice, Attorney General Madrid declined to respond to 2 visits made to her office by Clifford Carnicom to discuss the aerosol issue. Also in November of 1999, the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency responded to a citizen by stating that they were unable to complete an investigation. Efforts have been made to involve the media in exposing the aerosol operations, including ABC News 2020 investigative journalism staff, who responded that the request for examination of the aerosol issue was not a topic that they would cover. Since the beginning of 1999, a series of more than 36 scientific methods have been used, most notably by Clifford Carnicom, to examine the dramatic alteration of the atmosphere that has taken place. These tests have been conducted with much labor, time and expense. They've been conducted with very limited resources and equipment, much of it requiring original construction, development or modification. What follows is only a partial overview of these sampling methods, which have been diverse and thorough, spanning more than 9 years. As far as is publicly known, the authorities have not attempted to replicate these tests, nor have they reacted to the results in any formal fashion. Therefore, the method has been primarily one of reverse engineering, to figure out what is being sprayed on us and why. These methods include meteorological studies, an examination of visibility standards and their reduction from a maximum of 40 to 10 miles. Studies of acid and alkalinity levels of rainfall across the country. Photographs and video showing emissions from aircraft which are in complete defiance of the conditions for any normal contrail formation. Direct observation with the naked eye of aerosols originating from the aircraft gathered by thousands of individuals around the world. High-efficiency particulate air filters, which have been used to directly filter the outdoor air in repeated tests. Extraordinary levels of particulate materials have been found, including the repeated presence of unusual filaments, a gel formation, crystals, and powders. Electromagnetic devices which have been developed and used specifically for this research. Distilled rainwater samples to concentrate any solid materials or particulates. Observation of irregularities in normal radar activity. The tests reveal that as a result of the aerosol operations, samples of the atmosphere have been found to contain unusually high levels of the following: metallic-based materials, a class of elements that have the property that they can become electrically charged with the energy from sunlight alone. One of the elements found in unusual and unexpected levels is barium. Unusual airborne filaments. Under a microscope, these fibers are seen to contain unusual biological components. Incredibly high mold counts are regularly found, surprisingly, even in the extremely dry environment of the high southwest. Additionally, testing has produced a variety of indications that the atmosphere is regularly being used for electromagnetic applications, which can have a very direct influence on the health of humans.
I have a degree in science, I have a doctorate in science, so I consider myself to be maybe not an expert in this particular thing, but I know how to look at things. And I learned a little bit about meteorology and the atmospheric conditions necessary for even a contrail to form and persist, much less ones that just dissipate, and found that there were no laws of physics that supported this activity or the explanation of this activity as a normal water vapor or frozen vapor trail. And so I came up with things like, well, all of a sudden, the jet goes overhead, and in the same sky you'll see 2 or 3 jets passing overhead, and there's nothing. You can barely see the jets because they're so high up. And other jets come into an area, and all of a sudden the white trail starts all of a sudden coming out of the jet, and then it stops, and then it starts again. And I've seen a number of occasions where they just did dashes across the sky. And I
stops and
starts.
I
talked to a few pilots, and I asked them, well, how can you do this? And they said, well, you can turn your engine off. I said, would you do it over and over again? He says, if you're nuts. And I started noticing, especially by March of '99, April of '99, people were becoming very, very ill. And at the time I was working in a healthcare facility, and I was seeing a lot of upper respiratory disease happen. And over the years, I've watched more and more people come down with asthma, and you can hear it. You go into the supermarket and you find children, children that are 2 and 3 years old, and you can hear them wheezing. You can hear rails in their chest. I mean, this is very unusual.
The following is a reenactment of a transcribed interview between Clifford Carnicom and Gwen Scott, naturopathic doctor and former CNN broadcaster, originally recorded in February of 2004.
You have a background in the world of journalism and specifically broadcast journalism. Can you talk a little bit about that background and also the relationship of the media to what is occurring?
Yes, well, you know that I was in broadcasting for 30 years. I worked for all 3 affiliated networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and many of the larger markets, and I culminated my career as an anchor at CNN and Headline News. So I have over the years a lot of really good contacts in some pretty high places in the media. But I would imagine pretty much everybody watching this will know that there have been dramatic changes in the media. Who owns the media? The quality of human being attracted into the media. In other words, why are they there? When I started, it was mostly all print folk, and they kind of had to tell us, come on, clean up your act, this is visual. But people were coming from the old school of journalistic, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And you're the watchdog, and you go for that story, and you never accept the official version, and on and on and on. Most of the media and information we get now is owned by only 3 companies. When they deregulated, when the FCC deregulated, they allowed these huge, like AOL Time Warner, to gobble up. So you've got these large entities controlling all the information, whether it's film, radio, And yes, when this started, I called in every chip I ever had. I called a very good buddy at CNN who really assigned most of the stories. He was very high on the story, very interested. I sent him your website, a lot of your information. He was hi, yay, yay, shut down. And I never did get an explanation. As you well know, I contacted some of our local media people. The main anchor on the local station wanted to do a story, we thought, and we shot a lot of video of the activity. In those days, it was very obvious. Now it's a little harder. You don't have the mornings when you have the deep blue sky and then the afternoon. Now you get the pale blue-white sky if you're lucky, and as you well know, that story never aired. USA Today, which is an international publication, did a story on it, but it was obviously with an agenda, basically poking fun at those goofy people who saw those things. I believe there was one or two credible people interviewed, but for the most part, the reporters started out with an agenda to sort of mock or make fun of those people who were seeing things in the sky. And if I had a dime for everybody else that I called, wrote, or begged, I could at least buy an ice cream cone. To no avail, just hitting a wall.
And this was with all your connections?
This is with years of connections. It's unprecedented in my life, and I cannot name another story. People point to Watergate as this big watershed cover-up. I find that laughable. This, in my opinion, this is the biggest story. And I approach many of my colleagues this way. This is the biggest story in recorded human history. You have an entire planet now covered with whatever, by whoever, and nobody is even acknowledging it. What the heck is going on, and how come we don't know?
That is the question. What could explain that level of refusal?
Fear. Because the folks who get it, they're afraid. They know it's something bigger than them. They know all the possibilities of who's able to put planes in the sky, that many, every day, 24/7. It doesn't take a nuclear physicist to figure out that it's not the guy around the corner. This is big.
So even the journalist has that threshold that they're unwilling to cross.
Oh yeah, afraid. And the few that are left, who do catch on to it, say, wow, I want to do a story, like we were just discussing. They hit a wall somewhere, and I'm never told where it is. I don't know if it's the news manager, I don't know if it's the station manager, I don't know where. They hit that brick wall, and the story goes away.
Gwen Scott, naturopathic doctor.
Clifford, it's so good to be on tape in person with you on this subject. I know before we couldn't show my face, we couldn't hear my voice because I was under contractual agreement. But today what I'd really like to talk about is the medicine end, which is my passion and my whole reason for being involved in this is to try to help people stay as well as they can stay given the givens. Never thought I'd live to be seeing these times. As you know, recently information was brought to us that's critical in terms of health. So I want to deal with that first, and then we can go back and talk about the other contents of this aerosol spray and the impact of the body, and perhaps some mitigating medicines. We have found out through a very credentialed research doctor that perhaps what we're seeing occasionally show up in our air supply is a fungus. The reason this is so critical is apparently this fungus dramatically compromises the immune system by consuming those nutrients the immune system uses to repair and rebuild. And like every system in our body, the immune system has to keep rebuilding itself. It will wear out, it will wear down, and it has to keep regenerating. If it doesn't have those nutritional tools to do that, your immune system becomes dramatically compromised, unable to deal with any kind of invader. That's why I think we're seeing so many more colds and flus than we've seen in the last 5.5, 6 years, than we've seen in a long time. I know in my clients, these things are like epidemic. Sinus infections, colds and flus, that's on the lighter side. On the heavier side, we're seeing a lot more cancers and some very devastating disease, implying an extremely compromised immune system. Part of that has to be this fungal kind of invasion because, as I said, this fungus eats the nutrients that the immune system uses to rebuild itself. I don't know if you know, one of the top respiratory specialists in the United States was recently on the Today Show He's written a book called something about the breathing crisis in this country. And he told, I think it was Katie Kirk, I don't recall, who was interviewing him, maybe Ann Curry, that death or mortality from respiratory disease had gone from number 8 5 years ago to almost number 3. That's huge. That means that the third leading cause of death now in this country is breathing. And one has to wonder what could have happened in 5 years to have created that kind of crisis, is the only word I can think of. So this is something that anybody who breathes, and I'm assuming that's anybody who might be seeing this documentary, needs to be concerned not only for themselves but everyone they love. This isn't like a firing squad where everybody goes down and you get to watch it at one time. This is a cumulative poisoning that will demonstrate in different people in different manners depending on how strong their immune system was to begin with, what their genetics are, and many other factors. So this is something that will demonstrate in a lot of different ways. You're not going to have, as I said, the firing squad effect, but what you will have is over time more and more debilitated people, more and more people who don't feel well, more and more younger people, which I'm seeing quite a bit of now, in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, with problems that we never saw in that age range, or rarely, I should say, saw. And I know in Albuquerque alone, 5, 6 years ago, 6 to 8% of the children were diagnosed as asthmatic. Today, as of now, it's 70%. It's devastating. These are children.
After confronting the reality of aerosol operations, it is a natural question to ask, why? Who would want to alter the very air that we breathe? The evidence is now clear that the aerosol operations are a covert activity, an operation that will never ask for your consent and that is being conducted on you and your family, regardless of your concerns. The reasons why do not appear to be restricted to a single purpose. From all data gathered at this point, there could be said to be 6 main reasons why aerosol operations are being conducted. 1. Modification and control of weather and the environment. 2. Electromagnetic operations. 3. Military operations. 4. Biological operations. 5. Planetary and geophysical change. 6. Sophisticated surveillance systems. There is an overlap that can make it difficult to discern where one program may start and another end. It's likely that many or all of these operations are being conducted at the same time. Regarding modification and control of the environment, the evidence now shows that because of the aerosol operations, the very physical nature of the atmosphere has been changed. There are several components in the aerosols which are repeatedly found. One of these is a salt that seeks and holds on to moisture and can, therefore, reduce the frequency and amount of moisture that reaches the ground. Another observation that has been confirmed over and over is that the aerosol operations frequently, if not usually, are conducted in advance of approaching moisture and storms, thereby altering weather. It may be no coincidence that drought is now commonplace and widespread, and that moisture on the planet is becoming an increasingly precious and sought-after resource. It has been claimed that perhaps these aerosol operations are intended to lessen the negative effects of global warming. Unfortunately, the facts do not support these theories, and in fact, the majority of the data strongly demonstrates that these activities are having detrimental and potentially disastrous consequences to the life and ecology of this planet. Furthermore, it is easy to demonstrate that the vast majority of substances found within the aerosols will actually increase the heat levels of the lower atmosphere, rather than decrease it when they are placed into it. The United States Air Force has publicly disclosed their intention of owning the weather by 2025. And based on the information gathered and scientific tests done, it would not be unreasonable to think that that objective has, in part, already been accomplished. The full environmental impact of these aerosol operations to the soil, the seas and lakes, the flora and fauna, and the agriculture that sustains us is staggering. Electromagnetic operations designed to affect human health, control communication and guidance systems, including airplanes and missiles, radar interference, missile destruction, enhancing the ability of transporting micro-sized particles and molecular change of the atmosphere. Barium is a highly toxic heavy metal which has been found to be one of the key components contained within these aerosols. Barium, like other metals, has the property of increasing the conductivity of electricity in the atmosphere. The more of it there is, the more precisely electrical pulses can be sent through the atmosphere. The implications of being able to modify the atmosphere electrically and magnetically are enormous. A small change in the electrical properties of the atmosphere completely alters the way in which that shell around the Earth can be used. Changes in heat and energy are at the foundation of the life of this planet and all those who dwell upon it. It is a necessary, logical, and natural supposition to assume the almost inevitable role the military has in the aerosol operations. A glimpse into the military window has been achieved, and the central theme that has emerged is of control. Control in the deepest and most far-reaching sense. For when the atmosphere of the planet is controlled, life itself is controlled. If it seems unthinkable that anyone would consider such a goal, consider United States Patent 4686605 by Bernard Eastland, written in 1987, entitled A Method and Apparatus for Altering a Region in the Earth's Atmosphere, Ionosphere, and/or Magnetosphere. There are many people who have concluded that this patent essentially represents a blueprint for a facility that currently exists, which is operated by the US Air Force. HAARP, which stands for High Active Auroral Research Project, is located in Alaska, and information about it can easily be found on government websites, including pictures of the facility. The ionosphere is the upper part of our atmosphere. The stated purpose by the Air Force for the HAARP project is that of a scientific endeavor aimed at studying the properties and behavior of the ionosphere, with particular emphasis on being able to understand and use it to enhance communications and surveillance systems for both civilian and defense purposes. It may be this, and then again, it may be more than simply a scientific endeavor. Per Mr. Eastland's patent, through the use of a HAARP-like facility, it is possible to put unprecedented amounts of power in the Earth's atmosphere at strategic locations and to maintain that power level with a pulsing of energy. Take note that this patent also recommends the use of large clouds of barium to increase the conductivity of the atmosphere. Mr. Eastland stated a variety of uses for his invention, most of them military. It can focus in a particular area the massive energy necessary to create the same destruction as the detonation of a large nuclear device, without actually having to detonate such a device. It can enhance or interfere with communication and guidance systems, including those of airplanes and missiles, interfere with radar, destroy missiles, modify weather, and it can increase ability to broadly spread exceptionally tiny particles through the atmosphere. The executive summary for the HAARP project specifically mentions forcing the descent of particles from the atmosphere toward the ground. Use of the atmosphere to spread unusual biological substances. Biological. Definition: affecting life or living organisms. In 1977, the United States Senate held hearings on the subject of biological testing by the Department of Defense on human subjects without their informed consent. In the opening statement, Senator Ted Kennedy identified the key issue of the hearings: the known use of Americans as unwitting subjects for open-air germ warfare testing conducted in the public domain by officials of their own government. Furthermore, he poses the critical question: should a democratic people cede to its government the full responsibility of determining when secret tests on unwitting subjects are necessary to protect the nation's security? Years later, this is no longer a question that is even being posed to the public. It is a fact that harmful biological components have been repeatedly identified in a series of atmospheric samples over the past several years. Public officials have never acknowledged or responded to this evidence, and the reality of the evidence continues to be denied. You must decide for yourself if the claims of this documentary are true or not. The first step is to simply look up. Start observing the sky and the activities of aircraft above you. Observe the different trails left behind aircraft: contrails or aerosols, clouds or aerosol banks. Though the amount and frequency of aerosol aircraft activity will be different in different areas, the likelihood is that in a short time you will observe aerosol operations in the skies above you. If you decide that there is cause for alarm and that something must be done about the aerosol operations, we suggest you take the following measures. First of all, start paying more attention to your own health and the health of those for whom you are responsible. Check with your own health practitioner. If your health practitioner is not familiar with the aerosol issue, ask them to watch this program. Pass this DVD on to as many other people as you possibly can. This documentary is a not-for-profit venture. It may be freely copied in its entirety and distributed. No individual is permitted to distribute this documentary with a profit motive. It has been created for the benefit of the public. Start talking to other people about it. When you notice aerosol operations in the skies above you, ask others to look. The most important step one can take right now is simply getting people to observe for themselves what is going on. Write, call, email, and visit your elected representatives and demand answers. Join with others to openly and peacefully protest what is going on. It is apparent that success will only result from an enormous and overwhelming groundswell of grassroots activism. The sober reality is that the health of this planet has already been disastrously affected, and we simply do not have much time to reverse it. Our atmosphere is our lifeblood, and most of us are moving forward with our lives, oblivious to the growing threat. Please use your talents and resources to help this planet. Clifford Carnicom chose the vital role of researcher and has endeavored to give us the most accurate and well-documented information possible about the true nature of aerosol operations. Others have chosen to help regarding the health-related aspects, and still others are working tirelessly to distribute this information broadly. You must determine your own role and exercise it while you still have the opportunity. If you are somehow involved in these aerosol operations or know of others who are, don't withhold it. Come forward and make your information known. If you've been told that what you are doing is for the benefit of mankind, please take an honest look at the tremendously negative effects created by these unnatural aerosol operations. If we remain silent in the hope of preserving our freedom and security, we are certain to lose both. Please help to restore and regain the beautiful blue, clean, healthy sky.
thank you all for watching that documentary. And I want to thank again those people that have made this happen. And take a break for a couple of minutes, not too long, and we'll go back at it. And thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And on that documentary, I am late in making it available, and I would ask for your help in making up for a bit of lost time. And let's get the documentary out there if you're game and willing, and circulate it as widely as possible. The first documentary is spread around the world. And there is an irony here, and our population here is a demonstration of that tonight. But the world is changing, and much of the communications is simply happening in that, quote, virtual world. And there is irony, but I know that the documentary is circulated around the world. I know that there are people that express an interest in the information that we're presenting this weekend from across the world and the country. And hopefully they will also find their way through the daytime. The location here is a little bit tricky to find. But there actually is a global network out there that acts in a sort of mysterious and difficult way in communicating amongst each other. And bringing people together physically is a wonderful thing to do, and that's why I wanted to hold this. But there is a network out there that's working with us today, and that's what we'd like to tap into, and I'd like to get that documentary circulating. No reason that won't be around the world if you guys will help. The general structure of this conference is split into two parts. The work today will be primarily on the environmental side of research, and the work tomorrow will be primarily on the biological aspects of the research. But there will be no sharp line between these at all, and they will be crossed immediately, very shortly. But I am going to spend the majority of the day focusing on the environmental side, and that work encompasses primarily a period of 1999 to, call it 2005, 2006. For the last 5 or 6 years, my work has been primarily directed to the biological side, but these folks are together, and we will see that as we go. There are people that approach this subject and prefer to deal with only the environmental side. There are individuals who actually deny the association of biological factors, but my work does not lead me there, and so we will go where the work leads. It will not always be comfortable for us to encounter the information which I must present. I present the information out of service and obligation and duty to seek the truth. I am not to put barriers on where one goes to find that truth, however uncomfortable and unpleasant and hideous that may become. I'm going to give you the short version. For those people who would like to be here 5 minutes for today's work, they want to be here 5 minutes and they want to leave, I'll try to give you this 5-minute version. And when it's over, then I start my work. And the 5-minute version is to start with a video clip, and we will be showing some video clips through this, that I took 3 days ago. It was October 19th, I believe. 3 days ago, I took this video. Let's watch it for 2 minutes first, and realize that this is now, okay? This work starts in 1999. We have 12, 13, 14 years come along. This video is now. And if you want to contrast this experience with what you see, go ahead and step outside and you look at your world, and then you look at this world. John, if we can, and I want to thank John for what he's doing. He's trying to make sense of all these clips and videos. But we have about 2 minutes there.
Take the other one down.
Sure. Let me see how I do that. I guess we'll knock off a switch there. Let's see. How's that? Set. Hopefully it's going down. Does anybody know how to go further? It says standby. Do I go again? I'll pull the plug, but that's a little mean. I don't know how it shuts down further. Does anybody know these things? Is there an external switch?
It looks like we got it down.
Is it down okay, do you think?
Yeah.
We just need to close
It's just,
so that other...
Are we okay?
Yeah, this one is coming out.
And John, if you're able to, John, if you get this and you're able to pause this at that place that we talked about,
Yeah.
and it could be done on the last round too, it wouldn't have to be right away.
Okay, I'm just gonna restart it.
John, how do we turn off the overhead lights up there? That's what's shining on.
I see.
Okay.
Let's go ahead.
There.
3 days ago, folks, about 4 miles from where you're sitting, what you will see is a pan, a 360 pan of your sky and environment 3 days ago, approximately 4 miles from where you sit. And this video will be rougher than I usually do because it was just done quickly on the spot. Each one plays one at a time, I guess. This is looking easterly and southeasterly from the, and we'll keep going, John, and really if you find that one longer segment, that will be sufficient, and or the one where we're driving. We'll get to where we find that panning. When you see a panning, you're running 360 around your environment. And that's the start of it. You're panning around, looking to the north, and then you're starting to head to the northwest. And so that cut off too. Eventually we're going to find one that completes the circle, I hope. That's continuing. That's actually continuing the circle. You're dropping down to the horizon to the west, right here. And this is roughly at the Canyoncito exit. Do you have more?
So I'm trying to.
Okay, he's trying to find him. Trying to get out of the way.
No.
There are two that, one in particular that loops around. I'd like to see if we can make it. I think that top left one is probably it, John. Yeah, this is the one I was speaking of. This is a pan. You're looking about north 60 east, right there. And now you're working to the north. If you can freeze that, John, that's great. This is it, folks. Okay? This is it. 12, 14 years later. You know, we have to deal with it, whatever it is. But 12 years later, I'm right back where I was. Okay? You showed me a change from 12 to 14 years ago.
It's getting worse.
Now, I have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it. But this is the point. 12 years, and actually, I'll make the point that we actually have 19 years. There is no sharp line of a certain day, 1999, this started. There is a history, and we can talk about that. There was a change in the level and scale in 99. But I have very good reason to believe these operations were beginning up in the northwestern part of the United States, where I lived up in Montana, around 1994. If you figure this out, we're up next spring, we're up to 19 years. Okay, 19 years. Now, I'll go ahead and mention this issue of normalcy because it will come up. What is normalcy? Normalcy is that which we're accustomed to, wherever it comes from. And I used to say it this way. I used to say you could have an 8-year-old kid, or you could have a 12-year-old kid, And I could go to that child and I could say, what is normal to you? And this child could describe this child could describe this environment to me. And this child could legitimately say, this is normal. This is my life experience as I have grown up. This is real to me and this is normal. And I cannot refute that argument. And now I must extend that situation to the 19-year-old adult as of next spring. We are deep into it at this point. We are crossing the generational gap. And this is a critical stage when you cross the generational gap of knowledge, experience, and information. And one of the points of this whole conference will be to never submit to that which you know is wrong. No matter how long, no matter how deep, no matter how painful, to never submit to that which you know is wrong. And this is wrong. This is not your world that is normal. And you know that it's not normal. And if you're confused, step outside right now and ask what you see and why. What is different? Why is it different? And you know, we are past the stage of diplomacy now. I'm much too kind and courteous in my work of allowing for all of the possibilities in life. And I will continue that process because it's my nature. And if you can pick up the one driving, that's fine too, because that's the real world on the way to work. It's time to call it as it is. And all of the games that were played over the years about what is the source of this problem that I'm showing you, it's done, folks. Listen, the aircraft is there. There's nothing unusual about using an aircraft to disperse aerosols. We'll go over it. I've got it as soon as you could do it. In 1947, as soon as you could fly a plane up there, they were doing it. And it's in the record. So the argument about what is the source of what I'm showing you now, it is evident what the source is. It is direct, artificial, intentional, human alteration of our environment using machines and equipment and technology to alter our world. That is the source of this. That's the problem. Okay? Now we're going to show another video, and this video will be, I think, about 5 minutes long. And this video encompasses the majority of the cause of this, the source, the explanation, the physics of what is going on. Why is that producing that effect? We're going to watch a science teacher talking to a class, I think it's in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And you know, it took me 12 years to find what I'm showing you. I did a lot of work to try and give you what I'm seeing in this simple video for 5 minutes. And it came through my browsing at the bookstore. And there was I browsed through science books and such, although our bookstores are now gone, and I missed that. But there was this book called How to Fossilize Your Hamster. And it was cute and it was clever, and I picked it up, and it's a science book with all these sort of interesting little experiments in it. And I see this fellow describing the situation, which is what I've been trying to explain for years. I know the information that he's speaking of, but I see how he's able to show this in a relatively simple way. So if we can show this video, and the title of this will be called something to the effect of Cloud in a Bottle, and what you're speaking about here will be a controlled experiment. And we will talk in more detail about this, and the emphasis here is not to say, oh, it's smoke. Listen to the points of, what are the points here? Containment would be one, controlled environment, right? And what is required physically to make something happen. Let's see these, and then we'll bring them up certainly through the workshop in great detail, actually. This is the physics of what we just saw.
Okay, we're going to do a little demonstration here of making a cloud in a bottle. Make sure you go back and you review your ideas of high pressure and low pressure. The idea that high pressure is air that's descending. As it descends, relatively cool as it's coming down, but as it descends, it compresses and warms up, can hold more water vapor. As it warms up, and air that contains more water vapor is less dense, it's lighter than dry air, it'll begin to rise, okay, the concepts of density and convection. As that relatively warm, moist air rises and expands, that expansion is going to cause it to cool off. As it cools off, the relative humidity is going to go up to 100%, and if it hits the dew point, you'll get a cloud. Now, to do this little procedure, you need a clear 2-liter bottle, and you want to make sure it's clear. Don't use a green one. You won't be able to see what's going on. And some water, and I like to use the wooden kitchen matches. Okay, you need some source of smoke, whatever source you would use, but matches are a pretty good source. Okay, first thing you do is you take your bottle, make sure it's got a good tight-fitting lid, and pour just a little bit of water in here. You don't need a whole lot. We're only going to put it in until it fills up the little dimples down at the bottom. Okay, about like that. You really don't need much more than that. You don't want to put too much water in. Now, go ahead and put the lid tightly on the bottle. And to simulate high pressure, relatively cool air descending and warming, we're going to put some pressure on the air in this bottle by squeezing it. And so as we squeeze the bottle, pressure is going up, the air is warming up. If we swirl it just a little bit, we can get some more water molecules hopping out of there. And get those water molecules evaporating. Now, to simulate low pressure, what we're going to do is we're going to let go of this bottle real quick. It's going to snap open. The pressure is going to drop. The temperature is going to drop. Hopefully we'll get down to the dew point and we'll get a cloud. Let's see what happens. Okay? Here we go, and well, I don't see anything in there. Do you? No, it didn't happen. It's because we forgot something very important. Water does not just condense for the heck of it. It's got to have something to stick to. It's got to have something in the air for it to condense onto. And we call these small particles in the air, particles of dust, smoke, pollen, variety of small things in the air, condensation nuclei, points where condensation can happen. That's where the matches come in. Now we're going to open our bottle up, and now instead of matches, we're going to call these things condensation nuclei generators. We're going to make some smoke. The trick is to get the smoke in the bottle. Get as much in there as you can. This can be kind of awkward, but we'll get it in there. Okay. Oh, that looks good. Make sure that your bottle is nice. Yeah. Okay. So now, I don't know if you can see it very well, but the bottle is a little bit smoky. There's smoke in here. Okay. And that's going to act as condensation nuclei for our cloud. So now we're going to increase the pressure, and by increasing the pressure, we're going to get the humidity up in there. We're going to get water molecules evaporating. The smoke does not make the water molecules evaporate. The smoke's not changing the temperature. The smoke is just there to provide particles for the water to condense on. Okay? Now notice when I kind of shake this up, I'm just kind of gently swirling it. Okay? You don't want to do big swirls because then you're basically washing the smoke out, and that's not what you want. Okay, well, it doesn't take long. Let's see if we get a cloud in our bottle this time. So now we're going to release the pressure. Let's see what happens. Oh, yeah, we got one that time. If we increase the pressure, cloud will go away. If we release the pressure, the cloud comes back. So high pressure is associated with clear, sunny days. Low pressure with cloudy days. And now I can take the lid off here. We'll actually make our cloud come out. See, that's not the smoke that went in. That's the cloud coming out. I can make little cloud rings. That's our little demonstration of how to make a cloud in a bottle.
And that one goes. That's the 10-minute version of what we're going to talk about today. You have the problem as it exists, and you have the physics underlying what is happening for your understanding of it. And for those that want the 5-minute version, you're free to go. You actually have the information that you need to understand the context of the problem. There are other things we will dig into quite a bit deeper, but you have the basic understanding to know where to go now to settle for yourself the reality of the situation that we will be discussing in large part today. So I won't be offended for those that need the short version, because I'm not their man. Okay, now we start. This is a challenge for me in the sense that I've had to think about how I am going to cover this material. It wasn't until about 2 months ago or 3 months ago that I actually saw a list of the papers that I've done over the years. It was just sort of loose in my mind. And I thought there might be about 100 of them or so. It looks like there's close to 300 papers that I've written over the last 12 years. And me being of a mathematical bent, I've tried to figure out how am I going to cover this material. I think I have roughly allotted 6 hours. It may change a little bit, but roughly 6 hours to cover 300 papers that I've written. And if I figure that out, I have roughly 1 a minute. And each paper is sort of its own topic and discussion. So the work and the body of work is quite large. There's no way around that. And so I have to decide how I'm going to do this and work within the frame I have. And also ask you to put up with me for even the 6 hours, I suppose. My first idea was to try and go through it chronologically, but it's just a little bit daunting. What happens when I look at these papers is I say, well, that's important. And then I see the next one, I say, well, that's important. And I can skip some. But I never make it through. I'll get through the first 12 papers, maybe, over the time. So it's not going to work to do that. And so what I thought I would do is organize this in my mind in the way that the work has evolved over the last 12 years in an evolutionary sense. The work has gone through certain stages. And I think what I will try to do is both give us some significant detail and information to work with, but make sure we get through that progression of thought and complexity and scope that has developed through the last closer to 14 years now, actually. And that's how I think I will approach this. And so I will simply have to pace myself, and that's an experiment for me. I don't exactly know. I have a rough outline. But we'll probably have to adjust as we get going. A rough outline of progression that we're heading through and what my mind went through during the dozen-plus years. The first stage will be that of simply documentation, that an observer, just saying somewhat similar to what's being described there, right? The process of observing and what do I see, and to record that. It's not in depth at that point. It's simply that of a documentation process. The next main stage will be that of starting to involve myself in environmental sampling. In other words, now we have something that we see, right? The next logical step in my mind was to say, well, okay, can we find out a little bit about what it might be? And I'm only a human being on the ground. Of course, I would love to be at the source, but I can't do that. I can get up to about 12,000 feet maybe. But I'm here on the ground, what can I do? And so I do that work, and we'll talk about this work in great detail. And then the next stage is that of analysis, where analysis starts to kick in. You see, you record, and then you start to examine, right, and test what you see. And then now you have information, so now you wish to analyze and to synthesize. I do, at least, my style. And say, well, what kind of picture does this present to us? And when I'm speaking of these stages are years. These stages aren't weeks and months, these stages are years. I have 2 or 3 years of observation. I have 3 to 5 years of environmental testing, and also these overlap as well. I have analysis involving years. I have one paper that I sat on for 8 years before I wrote it. This global warming question, and we'll talk about that one through the session. And so these are 3 stages that develop over a good 8 years, something like this. And none of them stop, and all of them continually cross over. I sometimes would go back, after several years would pass, I would go back and do an environmental test again to see if I got the same results. And many times I would question the reality of, did I actually record that? Did this actually happen? And I would go back to reiterate to find out how things changed. About 5 years ago or so now, 4 years ago, somewhere in there was a rather crucial line that has been crossed, and this is into the biological arena. The indications were there from the very beginning, as we will soon see. But about 5 years ago, my work on the atmosphere was in place. There really wasn't a whole lot more that I could do without getting access to more sophisticated equipment, more direct access to this source. So that body of work was in place, and it is in place. I have no reason to change anything that I know of. If I do, I'll do it. If I need to change it or retract it or correct it, I'll do it. But that body of work is still there. It is an interesting phenomenon that on a societal level, we are now at the stage where 12 years later or so, we're getting a second, let's say, documentary produced, which is at basically what I would call the observational stage and possibly the introductory stages of environmental analysis. There are secondary documentaries that are starting to emerge. Michael Murphy and What in the World They're Spraying was a recent one, right? But if you examine the questions and issues that are being presented there, I think it's fair to say that those questions actually were developed a good dozen years ago. And so what I'm seeking, of course, is the evolution to get to the depth of knowledge that we need. About 5 years or so ago, there was the emergence of a biological situation that was so extensive and so pervasive and had certain similarities to the issues of the earlier work that I could not deny the importance of it and the need to become involved in it. And so the progression that we will go through is the last 5 years is very heavily centered now towards the biological side, which will be tomorrow. And that's the general progression that we're heading through over these 2 days. And we will be condensing several years of work of each segment into, the hour period or whatever we have. And so what I would like to do is start at that most elementary and rudimentary level, and this is that of observation. Now, we're going to see if I can control a screen. Yeah, it works. You can start to see that, can't you? Okay, this is classic, because this was the opening day in my life for this. This photograph was taken on February 14th, 1999, and I remember the moment clear as could be, and I could talk to you about a half hour about that moment. This was the moment of realization for me on Valentine's Day, 1999, that our world was being changed. I remember 13 years old. I've always had an interest in aviation. I'm not an expert in a lot of things, but I sure dig into a lot of things. From a little kid, I always remember watching airplanes. I loved it. I remember San Diego as a 12-year-old teenager looking over the canyon. I can remember an aircraft in my mind right now that I see. And I know that world. And I know what that world is about. And I had an interest in meteorology when I was at college. I remember when I was 19 years old. I did my term paper on fog. I was in forest engineering, and I did my paper on fog. It was a little bit out of context of the course I was in, but I wanted to do it because it interested me. I lived in Eureka, California, which is fog country. I wanted to understand it. So I had an interest in aviation and meteorology my whole life, I became a student pilot at one time, took it on more seriously. I know the cloud charts and go back into the FAA charts of the 50s on cloud types. You know, I know this type of stuff. I had enough of a knowledge. I was a surveyor out on the ground for 12 years up in the woods. My life was based on the outdoors. The outdoor world is a big part of my reality and my life and my understanding. And when I saw this, and it happened Carol will tell you it happened at a subconscious level for about at least 2 or 3 weeks before. We had started to go out on trips as we moved to Santa Fe. And we'd wake up and it's a beautiful sunny morning, and we'd go have breakfast. We lived in an RV back then. We'd go have breakfast, we'd go out to go on our trip, and suddenly the sky had changed in an hour and a half while we were having breakfast. Completely changed. And this was happening at a subconscious level for several weeks. And then on February 14th, this is right outside of my RV that Carol and I were living in on February 14th, 99. And I remember the tree, and I remember myself with the camera, and this time I just stood. The difference was I saw it, and I just stood, and I waited. This is about a 20-minute progression. And I watched the transition take place. And you can say my instincts, whatever you want to say, my basis and accumulation of experience in my life, I knew that this was wrong. Now, if I make a claim in recognition that something is amiss, it is now my job to begin that process of recording it, to make it available to those that wish to see it. But eventually, when I make the determination that I view this as a crime, it truly is a process of documentation. It is that of collecting and presenting evidence. In this case, the jury is the world. You are the jury. And it is my job to present the evidence to you. And this is what I did. And so this was the start of it. Okay? And we can get into all the mechanics and details of, you know, what is going on. But start by recalling the video that we watched. And start to ask yourself, what were the crucial elements expressed within that video? And the elements were, you know, he had a container, right? So he was able to contain. But what were the elements? He had moisture in there, right? He had moisture. An absolutely critical element of what he did, and he made the point, I love the way he did it, he had to have smoke, right? He had to have the smoke. Now, for us, don't confine yourself to thinking smoke. Remember, he introduced the term condensation nuclei. We will be talking about that in more detail. But he made the point so strongly that you need something to adhere to. You remember that. It's critical. It's critical to everything that's happening. And it is at the basis of this change and alteration that is taking something. He said he needed something. So the job is, what is the something? Right? This is our job, and we will dig into it deeply. And the third thing he had was pressure. Right? He had pressure as a variable. These were the three critical components that will underlie the discussion of a great deal of what we get into, at least in this earlier stage. When we start, that's actually the beginning of the analysis stage, isn't it? When you look at it. Okay, and I'll show you a second photograph. See if I picked the right one. Yeah. All right. So these will be two representative examples of the process of documentation. There will be scores behind every one of them. Now, a little bit difficult because all of my equipment has been either jury-rigged or it's whatever I could do to make things happen. So, listen, if I had the means, I have a professional camera that has a shutter speed that I need and can get what I need. I don't have it. I'm stacking up lenses on here like you can imagine. Every time you're putting a lens on, it's dropping out light. Okay? And my shutter speed, the most I could get down, at least I could get down to, is 1/500th of a second. So this is a compromise, but it's a compromise at work. And this is a photograph that presents some serious contradictions and problems. If you want to make the claim that what we are saying is occurring is a natural and normal phenomenon, which has been the argument that's been poised, right, to convince us that all is really quite normal, if you have to make that argument, then you have to follow that through under whatever circumstances you run into. And you can never use the exception, at least I don't think that way. You can never use the exception to justify the whole. You have to look at the body of information and putting the exceptions in context. There are always exceptions of anything that I know of. There are always exceptions, and we want to deal with the exceptions, but you don't use the exception. It's a flawed logic to me, which is frequently done in the world of counter-argument, to take a single exception and then extend it to explain the entire range of phenomena. This photograph will present you with some complications, in the sense that what you have, if you look at this, you know, we could study these in great detail, but if you have two engines on an aircraft, they would leave an emission from those aircraft, right? And we'll go over normal contrail formation, that type of thing. But you would have a stream emanating from the engines. And those engines are on many, many airplanes located on the wings. Not all of them, but many of them on the wings. You know, the majority of them would have a wing here and a wing here. And so you expect to see that emission come from there, and you'd have two distinct separate trails, right? Okay, some problems that show up here. First will be that you have a continuous stream. I use the word laminar. Laminar is a sheet. Okay, you have a flat sheet of emissions going across the width of the aircraft. Okay, with no clear distinction. As a matter of fact, if you even look at how these form, you know, they're not distinct trails at all. You actually have the gap in between because of where the engine is. But you have what I would call a laminar flow, a sheet flow across the entire range of the wing of the aircraft. This would be the first question you would start asking. How would I do that? Okay. And I'm aware of most of the counter-arguments, and we can discuss them in great detail if we need to. They can get interesting, but they can also get a little tedious. And all I can say is that I believe I'm aware of many of the counter-arguments that can be presented, because it's in my interest to understand what those counter-arguments are. And if I truly felt, from the standpoint of a researcher and my basis of experience in my life, that those arguments explain the comprehensive picture that I'm presenting you today in this shortened version we have, even though it's 2 days, I would tell you that honestly. I would tell you if I thought that it did. But the counter-arguments that I have examined that seem to have a certain stage presence do not work, but if they did, I would tell you. But you go examine those counter-arguments as you go. This particular one, to give you an example very quickly, we won't do this all the time. This particular one, the counter-argument of this is that it's a vortex contrail, okay, and that this is quite normal. So I look it up, okay? I learn into what they call vortex contrails. I go look it up, and I look up the mathematics of this, okay? And if you look that up, you will find that this distribution of materials will need to follow what they call a sine function, and the sine function is a curve. And you will see that what they were claiming is that this material will have to have a diminishing of the materials in proportion to the distance from the source, okay? You do not have that here. You have constant density. We'll get into that stuff as much as we want to. The argument doesn't hold, but that's one example. But I'm willing to entertain, and always have been willing to entertain, the counter arguments. But it does not hold. You have, as the facts are, you have a laminar sheet coming from across the full width of the aircraft, and you have another little problem. And that problem is that the engines on this aircraft are located on the fuselage, not on the wing. These engines are very close together, relatively. They're not even on the wing. Ask yourself, what is the source of the material? The source of the material in that photograph is not the engines. And it's a laminar sheet flow. I'll stop it there, but if that's not the source, then what is the source? What is the method of distribution and dissemination if it's not the engines? And the logical conclusion is a system of dispersion, right? A system of dispersion which encompasses the full width of the aircraft. There are other photographs I could show for this. I'm not even saying it's representative of all the photographs at all. Listen, once we start thinking about designing systems, we can design systems in all kinds of ways. And I will tell you that I would certainly design a system that would look like it's coming out of the engine, even if it's not. Okay? So these are not intended to be necessarily representative, but these are representative of the problem in that there's contradictions that you must deal with. Okay? So these are two examples of the stage of documentation. The next stage is document. You document something, and now my next logical stage on this was to start to learn about meteorology. Now I have learned some about meteorology before, but what happens here is a new science actually evolves. You have an alteration in meteorology that you need to explain. And you need to become familiar with the conventional physics first, but then you have to seek an explanation of what you're actually after here. And that's what I did. It's probably back, I can start with the one that I was at. It's a fair paper. Yeah, this is actually a fair paper. This was one of the earliest papers that I wrote. And it was a meteorological examination. And it brought up the question of normalcy. The first thing that I did was the situation would be analogous to you taking what you saw in the video, that 2-minute clip I showed you of Santa Fe, right, 4 miles from here, to take that picture in your mind, and the alternate scenario I gave you, and I proposed to you, of stepping outside, and recording that in your mind, putting these side by side, and asking, what's different here? What are the variables? Why is this like this and this like this? And this is what this paper is about. And it's done at the meteorological side, where I ask the questions, what are the meteorological conditions of this day versus this day? And that's what this paper is about. Except it's not a single day. I do a statistical analysis. It's always my style. Try to get as much data as you can. So this is a study done over about a 2 or 3 week period, where you have a certain level of activity and you have a level where things are quiet, and to look at the meteorological conditions. And you can look at the paper, but the paper comes to the conclusion by sheer straightforward data analysis. What I would do is get the balloon observations. I think they pronounce the word radioson. I'm not sure. I know how a lot of things are spelled. I don't always know how they're pronounced. But forgive me if I'm wrong, but radioson, you can get balloon observations that will go up to 60,000 feet, and they'll give you the winds and they'll give you the temperature. And I gathered this data. I realize I'm limited down here, right? The argument would be, well, the conditions are up there. So I gathered the data. And the statistical data says that the environmental conditions of these two situations that we're describing, exactly that which is in the video, exactly that which is outside, the environmental conditions are not different in any significant way. The humidity is not any significantly different, and the temperature is not significantly different. So the environmental conditions are the same, but the consequence is different. What is your other variable? The introduction of systematic operations of aerosol distribution using aircraft as the means of delivery. This is the other variable. You give me another one, I'll look at it, but this is a variable. And so this kind of study was done extensively to examine what are the physics of the situation. You know, when these trails form, what's expected? And I'll tell you, it's painful, the stuff I have to go through sometimes. Because I have, like Robert Cassidy was saying in there, I have the means, I believe, to think about things. And I know how to go after problems. But I don't have the extensive library of every single science that I want in my mind. So I have to dig into books. You know, and I'm 58 now, and I pick up the chemistry books and I say, oh, yeah, I had this stuff at one time, wonder what it was about, right? And I got to dig into it. And the physics, and that's what's going on in this stage, a lot of physics stuff, of coming up with my own models. I'm also pretty good at developing math models because I worked with it quite a bit in my life. And this is how humans try to explain our world, is you develop models, if you're good at that. And models, by the way, are subject to human failures, weaknesses, okay? People can put out a model and say that this is perfection. Models are an act of creation. You know, you want to talk about the blend between art and science someday, believe me, it's there. Models are an act of creation. But if you're good at it, they are based upon logic and sound science. And this is certainly what I try to use. And I would dig into this stuff, and I asked this question, you know, if I have a little particle of ice up here in such and such an environment, how long would it stay solid? Why would it stay solid, and for how long? Why would it change? I have to go through all of these questions. And I remember, I don't know, Carol, are you here? You know, I remember being up in Heron Lake. We go camping a lot. And she can tell you, but I'd have all these books out there on our campground, and I would be going through this chemistry to try and understand and develop my models. And all I can say, folks, is I did it. I did the work, and the work is here. And if you want to look at this work, I invite you to do so. But you will find numerous papers examining the meteorological aspects of this issue and the question of normalcy and the physics underlying an explanation of the change that is being seen. That work is there, and it's not my job to go through them. You'll see it, right? Normal. What is normal? Normal contrail photographs, right? And we'll get into other things a little bit. And there's several of them. How far from behind the wing should it be, and why? And you confirm it with any source you can find, including government sources. Any source that's reputable. I should be careful using that word in conjunction with that reputable. But nevertheless, you go after the best information you can, no matter wherever it comes from. And then by the end, I think that I have a reasonable understanding of the physics of that situation. And you will ultimately be driven back to that video. Remember, like I said, it's 12 years before I found it. I wish I could have given that 12 years ago. But that video embodies the physics of what is happening here. And it's not even just a matter of just putting something there. There's more to it than that. But the physics of what you saw in the video and the issues that I'm raising to you, as well as our own good common sense and powers of observation and analysis and understanding, they all present a logical conclusion that this environment is being, has been, and thus far will be altered unless we change that world. This is a deliberate and artificial modification of our environment. The environment that we depend upon for our very existence and spirit as well. Your life force depends upon this world. And this is an alteration of that world that I cannot deny in any way, no matter how many years I have looked at this issue. And this is the elementary part of this discussion. And you will have to decide for yourself whether or not you think this foundation has been established properly or not, because we will need to go further. But you will need to reach that determination amongst yourself, because you need that foundation to know where you're going. You're going to have to decide what you're going to do and what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and who you're going to do it with to get this world back. And you will have to have an understanding and conviction in your mind about what is real and what is not, and what is right and what is not. And I made the point earlier about the generational loss. We are now becoming dependent upon us, those that have been here longer than the 20 years, to establish what is that truth is and what that reality is in terms of your right to existence on this planet in a non-polluted, non-altered world. It is our responsibility to do so. And, you know, you have to ask, what is the process then of establishing reality? We had that question of normalcy in the 12-year-old kid, and you don't have that as an argument. So what do you use? You have to extend your process of thinking beyond just a human experience, right? What I see right now. You do have, this is why I've done this, is you do have to dig into the science. And of course, you don't have to necessarily do all that, but certainly a common theme that will emerge out of here is that you must do what needs to be done. And each of us will have our own particular talent and skill, and this just happens to be the world that I'm in. We have our comfort zones, right? This is my comfort zone that I've expressed myself in, and I try to step out of it as I can. You have your place in this world, And you will need to decide how you wish to express yourself. It's folly to think that everyone would choose this path. This is just what I do. And you want to talk about the needs that exist for expression and of your energy and your talent. Believe me, they're there. And they're there in a zillion ways. And this is just one. So this work was done. And this work exists, and you can examine it. And you make that determination as to whether or not you think these conclusions are sound. And what I was saying there was, you know, you do have to go where you need to go to get the true information, to find truth. You cannot rely on just my experience. You cannot rely on what someone tells you is the truth, which is a huge problem in terms of control of information and media. Listen, I could present an alternate scenario here of hundreds of statements, documents, that life is perfectly normal. Okay? I could do this. You could have an entirely different perception of the framework in which I'm presenting this issue to you if I had control over the message and the information that you're receiving. And this level of control does exist in our world, as Gwen Scott made the point of. The consolidation of information is a very serious problem, and you have to examine and ask yourself, are you truly getting access to the information that you even need? And I would certainly contend that you're not, and it will take effort and energy for you to find it and to utilize it. Let's see if I can find this paper. Very good. Thank goodness for search engines. Okay, you saw this paper in the documentary, but let's spend a couple of minutes on it. The issue here, again, I see things as they're evolutionary, and they're stages that we go through in terms of our realization and confrontation of reality, our awareness, and we have to seek that truth wherever it lies, whatever it takes to get through this. And this is another stage. And so imagine the situation that's occurring. 1999, 2000, this era, something happened in terms of the scale of the operation. Like I say, I believe it was operational early and can actually trace it back to the close of World War II. But something happened around 99 in terms of the scale of this operation and decisions that were made. But imagine we're in about 2003 or 2002, and you have this world now. This is not just me. I'm one person that's taking a particular tact and style of presenting my information, right? I'm a computer person, so I say, oh, web pages, this is a part of our new world. And I have the means to actually communicate with people without having a broadcasting station or something like this. And so I use that medium, and I just start putting up information. I put up the photographs, and I say, this is what I see, folks. Nobody knows me. Nobody knows me at all. 2002, 2003, somewhere near by this time, we have a body of people. It's actually across the globe, but it's without any doubt this country. You have a body of people involving conservatively, I think, scores of thousands of people that are aware that something is very wrong here. And they are reporting it. What they're doing is they are reporting it. They're starting to beat the drum. Alan's not here anymore, is he?
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Alan.
Hey.
But we're beating the drum. And Alan made reference to the grassroots group in Santa Fe that started having meetings, beating the drum. It was happening all over the country. I didn't have enough information about what was happening over the world, but I suspect it was happening over the world. I certainly know it was at a certain point. But we can at least speak in this environment. And people were sending me information about what they were seeing. You had groups that did nothing but report what they see in the sky for years. So you had a grassroots network forming on a pretty large scale across the country that was voicing their opposition to what was happening and saying, something is wrong here. I want an answer. I want an answer. And they would go to their political officials who represent us. And they would say, we want an answer. Please help us. And I did that same thing to some degree, not as much as others. I'm not as politically oriented as other people are. You saw that I did make a visit to the Attorney General. And these are all interesting experiences, and I can tell you little stories about all of these, and maybe we get a couple stories in along the way. But I did that. I went to the EPA, to the Environmental Office, and asked for their data. I did this stuff in their studies, and I met with some of these people. But the point is that people were doing their job, as far as I'm concerned, as citizens. They did what they were supposed to do. I grew up with faith in the systems. My father was a Navy man for 30 years. I come from the mindset of a military man that had a lot of discipline in my life. But I believed in the systems. I worked for the federal government for 15 years. I didn't work there for a paycheck. I worked there out of public service. I did it because I actually wanted to. I left. I left because other reasons. I had to leave. I wasn't there for security. We have a country, right? You have institutions and you have systems that you have belief in because they're the basis of your whole life. I am a part of that experience too. You know, you start to ask questions like, you know, what is really patriotism, right? And you examine that question. What does it really mean? But I had belief in those systems, and I know all of these people across the country did too. They were all doing the right thing. They were asking for help. They were asking for an explanation, and there was no ill will out of any of them. They were doing what they knew was right and what is healthy and what we need in this world. And we have to give them credit, and I still do. I give them credit for doing what was supposed to be done, and they tried. But I watched what happened. And my job here was to record the responses, right? I'm still the documentarian here. And I'm saying, this is what I see. You know, this looks like something's off in terms of science of it. And yes, some people are aware of what's going on here, and they really are asking. There's nothing organized, and they can't seem to get organized either. Whatever they seem to do, it always seems to get fragmented, so there's no cohesive body of information. And they have these saviors in their mind, like Greenpeace, okay? They go to Greenpeace, my savior. And no matter where they went, they were always disappointed. They were always let down. Even Greenpeace let them down. You know what Greenpeace's response was? Their response was something to the effect of, we only deal with global issues. Okay? This is what and the world should know this, and they will. Greenpeace's response was, we only deal with global issues. If I need to make the point, it is a global issue. Okay. So no matter where they went, they were disappointed. And that was really difficult. It's really hurting to me to see what happened. Because, and like I say, the stage of diplomacy is probably dwindling at this point. But they were lied to. Okay? They were denied the respect that they deserved with the presentation of their information. They were marginalized. They were labeled. And they were lied to. And they were told that everything is normal, and that you should go about your business, and nothing really is important and not going on, and you must have these funny perceptions. And this was wrong, and it was my job to document that process, and it was done. And this is only a sampling, a small sampling. And this would be the case where somebody went through that formal process of writing a letter to a political official or an environmental agency or something like it, took some type of formal action, received correspondence back from them. So this is not the common person on the street, right? This is, the 1 out of 10 that represents 100. The person makes this effort, and they come back to me, and not everybody knows me at all, but they make the effort, they find me, and they send me the information. And my job is to put it up there. And I just read the letters. The letters are all here. You can read all of them, okay? Some of them were referred to. Some of them were referred to in the documentary. And there are no saviors here. This is the problem. Greenpeace wasn't your savior. Look who else wasn't your savior here, okay? Democracy Now! Whoever you think was going to be your voice of seeking the truth, sorry, they were never there for you. And I get a little bit on my little tirades, but I call it as I see it. They were not there. No matter who you went to and how you went to, and whoever you had faith in to represent you, they did not do their job. You heard what Gwen Scott did. She was a national broadcaster, folks. She's a little bit earlier than most of us. I think I remember her. But she was a national broadcaster on CNN. She wasn't pulling any punches in terms of what she did. I will tell you that she took the earlier version of the documentary, and put this into the hands of Ted Turner, okay, at CNN. There are stories behind the scenes that I could describe, and they're interesting stories. But we won't have time for all of them. But the point I wish to make is there was no savior. And how do we say it? Accept it, deal with that reality, get that in your blood, and then we move on. What we're about here down the road is we move on. My message is not always kind with people in terms of the things I say. But if you thought for a moment that I'm a person who submits and says all is woe, you've got the wrong picture. Because I will do what I can do and what I know needs to be done, and I will continually be inviting you and those that you know and for all across the world to make the mark that we know we need to mark. And I don't know how it's going to manifest it, but I will always be asking for it. And no matter how down and how rough this stuff gets to you and how evil or serious and painful it gets, underneath it, I will always have the drive, as long as I'm alive, to seek what I believe to be truth and what is right. And I will invite you to be a part of that process according to your own understandings and perceptions of where you think that challenge leads you. So, this happened. It's a part of the history. It happened, and it showed that the game was different this time. It showed that even if you did what you knew was right, and we saw this later on. I'm trying not to get too much on the social political commentary, but we have a changing world, and we've got a world that's changed. And we now see where you literally have huge demonstrations, sometimes involving millions of people actually, from the best I can gather, of demonstrations, the right to grievance and all this, right? And they get out there and do it, and there's literally no coverage of it. Right? So, and that's an extension. But see, I saw this coming in 1991, 99, 2000, and Alan was talking about my world was changed. And this was changing my world because those institutions and those systems, I saw that, they beat their head against the wall and they were just simply denied. They were not given their voice. They were not given their representation. And what certainly was a turning point to me was, and somewhere I have this top one, okay, that was, I told you about my father and the environment I grew up in a little bit, but this was my sort of moment of no turning back. And this was the Air Force. When I worked for the Feds, I was under a civilian branch of the Air Force. Okay. When I saw this letter, it's like I knew there was no turning back in terms of our point of the battle line, I suppose, being drawn. Because here was a case where the representative chosen for the Air Force, you can read it, but completely denied the existence of any issue, gave no attention to it at all, and even goes so far as to call it a hoax. And that was an interesting strategy, okay, that was used, gained a lot of background momentum from certain parties for a period of time to classify it as a hoax, to marginalize the issue. We'll talk another day and another time about why I don't use the word chemtrail, but that's another subject. But let me give you a hint that I don't believe that the emergence of that term is entirely accidental, and that there may be call it a certain strategy that's employed. Language is important. Language is very important in terms of how we perceive things and how we tend to categorize and box things. Another discussion. But the use of terms here, it's not always just accidental. And the choice of a strategy, I would call it a strategy, the strategy of calling it a hoax, okay, is not just an accident that's just chosen at whim. The EPA's response in their language and using the term "we are not aware," okay, these are not accidental phrases, in my opinion. These are carefully crafted strategies involving language that give us, the phrase plausible denial. That would be the basis of it, okay? The basis of it. So the Air Force did this. And we'll pay attention to this guy's name, Gibson. Sometimes there's loops that you don't realize where they go until many years later. And this was one of these cases, and it's another one of the little interesting sidelights of this. The fellow that generated this letter was a person by the name of Gibson. You had another person that you saw in the documentary that came out and used essentially the same language. Again, it's not accidental, I don't believe, right? Reinforcement. So you have these two representatives of the Air Force present this claim that everything is fine to us. Just a little piece of information. It took me probably 5 or 6 years later, but this particular name, Michael Gibson, I found him in other documentation, and he was being given an award at a ceremony. And Michael Gibson, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Gibson, is actually a master intelligence officer, is actually his vocation. He was presented here as being a liaison. If you look at the bottom or so, liaison to Congress, something like that. What'd you say? Yeah, Office of Legislative Liaison, Congressional Inquiry Division. He is presented as being sort of the intermediary between the military and Congress in sort of what you would call a public relations role. This is how he is presented. I will say that my later research identifies this individual as a master intelligence officer. Now, I won't go into that in great depth, okay, but we know what a master means, and we know what intelligence means, okay? And let us just say that the management and control of information would be a high priority within those divisions. Fair enough? Again, these things are not accidental. So this is what happens, and that stage is set. That stage is set by probably 2003. That strategy is in place. That this is all hoax. I would say ensuring that organized opposition or activism around the issue never materializes, that things stay fragmented, and that the issue remains marginalized. And Clifford Carnicom, to a degree, is attempted to be marginalized in that process. Right? The unfortunate part that I see us having here in terms of, again, evolution, is that we have a long window now where that state of affairs has now continued to exist. There was a degree of success accomplished in this strategy of marginalizing and confining the issue. I give a fair amount of credit for this, because we have a window of many years where the issue has been subsided in some ways, right? Like I said, 10 years later, we're just getting another documentary out on some of the initial questions that were raised 12, 12 years ago to me. That's not a sign of progress that I'm comfortable with. So we acknowledge what happens. Fair enough, we have to do that. But many of us have seen that our world has changed in many ways over the last dozen years that have altered the landscape such that people that had a difficult time accepting the prospect or reality of this situation. There is an issue of denial here that's very strong. We can talk about that also, the psychological aspect of this. It's very strong. But that people lost, let's say, that initiative and desire to maintain that force of organization and optimism when they were sort of let down and defeated. Okay, and that's happened. But our world has changed where many of us realize that the mechanisms that are in place in this issue, this happens to be the issues that I study. You know, we're going to see a short segment on GMO tomorrow, genetically modified organisms. And I look at this thing and I just say, wow, it's another one, okay? It's another one just as big and just as serious and just as deep as what I'm talking about. And they're all over the place. They're all over the place now. And many of us can accept that our world has changed. And it's an interesting question and point that Alan brought up, and many people bring up. And we have to ask seriously, are we at a point of change? And I don't know the answer to that entirely. But I certainly let you know that I don't quit in what I do. I told you that I'm inviting you to be a part of this process, right? And I really don't know where that's going to go. But I know that this story is not over. And there is no reason whatsoever to deny the full prospect of regaining the right to your existence and enjoyment of your existence on this planet and to the life which succeeds you and follows you. And you know, when I showed that video clip earlier on that 2-minute segment of just 3 days ago, you know, I wanted to ask a question. I didn't ask it then. But when I see that, the question that comes to my mind is, do you want to and are you willing to live in that world that we see? You know, it's like it has to come from the gut. At some point, you are going to have to decide, are you willing to accept and live in that world? So you've hung out for 10 years or 12 years, and maybe it didn't, you know, manifest where you have your political, you know, lobbying that you think you should have. But that underlying question needs to be there. Are you willing to live with that world? And then I don't have kids. Carol certainly does. I don't have children. But it's a very fair question to ask because I do think about it, because I have an interest in kids. Are you willing to have your children inherit and accept that world? Forget about yourself. Thank you. Forget about yourself. If you don't want to take it on in your life, out of duty and obligation, are you going to allow your children to inherit this world like we see? I can't live. I don't even have kids. But I can't live with that. The story of the human race is not this 40-year window that we have right now, or 60 or 8, whatever you want to call it. This window is not the story of humanity. There is a record before, and there is a future. And this is one small window into a situation. If we lived in medieval times, you know, we'd be dealing with the feudal stuff, right? And maybe you get your head chopped off. Not a good scene there either, right? But that was their reality. But was their story over there in that 40 years or 80 years? No. It's not over. And it is our choice, ultimately, what world we create and what world we leave. And I ask you to be a part of that future in all seriousness, however you choose to contribute.
Sense. From this point on, we urge you to look for yourself, use your own judgment, and reach your own conclusions. What you are seeing now is quite normal. These temporary trails are called contrails, which is a word formed from the words condensation and trails. They are made of water vapor, and they are a common and natural occurrence, which happens as a result of aircraft flying at high altitudes, in particular ordinary weather conditions. You can see that the condensation disappears fairly quickly, much like your breath on a cold winter day. The aircraft at the upper portion of the screen leaves a normal contrail, which vanishes as any trail of water vapor will. To contrast, beneath it is an aircraft emission that is thick, continuous, and persistent. The environmental conditions accompanying each trail are not exceptionally different from one another, and yet the resultant impact from each is entirely different. The only logical way this could occur is if the two trails themselves had very different qualities, and indeed they do. The majority of the footage that you are now seeing has been filmed in the high desert regions of New Mexico. This is an arid, dry environment with very low humidity levels. Contrails are very common here because they form easily in a low humidity, dry environment. Cold and dry conditions, exactly those conditions normally found in the upper atmosphere, are extremely favorable to contrail formation. The humidity levels of the upper atmosphere are relatively low. For a normal cloud to materialize, two fundamental elements must exist: particles such as microscopic dust and moisture. Unlike contrails, clouds cannot form well in especially clean air. They require particles that act as a base for water vapor to cling to. The size of these particles must be extremely small, less than 1/100th of the width of a human hair. The other essential component for normal cloud formation is a humidity level of about 70% or more. Notice that the requirements for cloud formation and contrail formation are entirely different from one another. Clouds need moisture and fine particles for the moisture to cling to, and contrails need the opposite: clean, dry air. This is because they are based upon entirely different natural laws. An aerosol is a substance made up of solid particles suspended either in a liquid or a gas, and in this case we can consider our own atmosphere to be a gas. Because in addition to the normal existence of clouds and contrails, aerosol sprays are being emitted from aircraft flying at high altitudes. Aerosols in the air can be seen in two primary forms: as an emission from aircraft and as a collection of suspended particles in the atmosphere. A suitable term for this collection of aerosols is an aerosol bank. It is known now that these persistent trails, known commonly as chemtrails, from the words chemical and trails, are not predominantly water vapor, like contrails, but are primarily solid in nature, because of the sheer volume of particulate matter they contain. By simply looking up and observing the skies, one can now regularly see with the naked eye aircraft repeatedly dispersing materials into the upper atmosphere at altitudes of roughly 35 to 45,000 feet. These materials expand rather than evaporate, and they usually transform gradually into a uniform haze that has, in recent years, tremendously decreased our general visibility and has altered the deep blue of our skies into a pale blue or dirty white. Although it might be witnessed in any given period, this commonly now occurs during times of very low humidity, on the order of 30 to 40%, instead of the 70% or greater that is required of natural cloud formation. And so we know now that these are not clouds in any conventional sense. They are a unique and artificial creation. These aerosol emissions are now well entrenched into our air supply. These changes in the very air we breathe have a fundamental impact upon all life on this planet, and these aerosol operations, by their very nature, violate the most
that I might tend to have. And so they offered to make a shorter version, a little bit scaled to a lay audience, and maybe reduce a little bit of the technical aspects of it. And they produced this. And it took these folks a year and a half of their volunteer time to edit the documentary to this version. They both still stand. They both are still available. This one is meant for us to have an introduction to this subject without taking an hour and a half. And we have, I guess, a desire for me to move a little bit, and so I'll do that occasionally. I tend to wander, as you'll see, so it'll be a challenge for any cameraman. So we're going to start with that and relax. Actually, I did intend to take a break. I'd still like to take just at least a couple minutes after, just to think about what you've seen, because it's a bit heavy. The weekend's going to be a bit heavy for some of us. But if you'd like, and by the way, I have only seen this documentary one time, so this is actually almost as much of a surprise for me as it is for you. But I would like to thank those folks that did this in the background that will never be known by their name for what they've done for us. So hopefully we can get this documentary running. Thank you.
For most people, a clear blue sky is a comforting sight. Indeed, of all the familiar sights in our life, the sky provides the reassurance that all is right with the world. But as with all things with which we grow comfortable, we sometimes take the sky for granted. Here is your sky, clear, blue, and limitless. Here is another view of your sky, this time dotted with clouds. And here also is your sky, and those now common trails. Is there any difference between this kind of airplane trail and these trails? Obviously, these easily observable trails are not natural cloud formations. They can be seen on any given day to come from airplanes. They are man-made and dissipate rapidly in the sky. These too are man-made and come from planes. But these trails linger, collect, and eventually cover the entire sky. Is there any difference between these clouds and these clouds? Between these trails and these trails? Why haven't we noticed them before? And why isn't anybody talking about them? In the early part of 1999, an immense operation began, an operation that many of us would find difficult to accept were it not so well documented. This operation has involved a dispersal of massive amounts of fine materials into our atmosphere, and the implications of these actions are as grave and far-reaching as they strain the limits of understanding. Should you ask the authorities, there will be counterclaims to the evidence presented here, and you may be told that all is normal, and as it should be. You may be told that there is nothing to be concerned about, and that everything is as it always has been. Your eyewitness accounts may be dismissed as unreliable, despite the fact that what you have observed is in direct contradiction to fundamental natural laws and your own common...
And keeping your immune system up without the supplements necessarily, although they're important, and the various treatments, whether they're conventional medical, complementary, alternative, which we also need to do to keep our bodies and our minds and our physiology healthy. So I'm also, as I look out there at this sellout crowd, I'm thinking this is also a very microcosmic representation of the level of where human consciousness is right now. This is the way people are showing up for levels of truth and awareness. So, you know, I won't go into percentages. I want to acknowledge you for being part of those who are willing to stand up and be heard, listen, do Q&A. But overall, and we are in a great time of shift. Things are changing very, very rapidly, and I know you're feeling it in your body, in your mind, in timelines, perceptions, and it's real. And there is a call that's going on right now for people to wake up to who they truly are. We're more than our egos and our personas and our physical bodies and our names and our jobs and our careers. And if we don't get to the core of that in some way, individually and collectively, we're going to have some real problems. As one futurist, Barbara Marx Hubbard, says, we are in an evolutionary spiral where there's a gap. Sometimes it's not smooth and easy, and you have to jump across these gaps. And we are in a gap place right now. And she says, evolve or die. So as a human species, cohabitating with other living forms on the planet, we have threatened ourselves to even exist collectively. I'm an optimist, and I think we're going to get through this. I think there's a lot of people waking up right now to what is really happening. First of all, you have to recognize, who am I? There's ancient sages and teachers and saints. The teachings have been universal. They found their way into different religions, philosophies. But if you don't know who you are, and your life is dictated by a mind that is programmed and has been conditioned based on belief systems that have been passed on for eternity, there's a problem. And like I said, maybe a little later on, Clifford's given me 10 minutes in the afternoon, I might go more into that. But I want to just set the context. I want to welcome everybody. I want to acknowledge the minority relationship and percentage to the world at large of 7 billion people. And I would say, how many of those 7 billion really know what's going on in terms of the atmosphere, of man-made interference, of geoengineering, which you're going to hear about, biological interference, and of course, all the PR spin that says the industrialization of our society and the affluence in our environment have not affected our health and wellness. There's not that proof. Of course, the PR firms and PR people are easy to buy. If they're bought, they'll say almost anything, as scientists will too. So, just briefly, I have a couple of more minutes. 1999 again, my mind is blown. Not only am I hearing about this spraying, I'm hearing in that year about The Biggest Secret from David Icke, who has been on the radio show a number of times. His material is hair-raising also. It moves into conspiracy theory, the oligarchy, plutocracy, the very wealthy and affluent few who may be pulling the strings on 7 billion, well, maybe 6 billion, 800 million puppets. So this is a wake-up time, and after doing a few shows, we had gatherings. This is after Transitions Radio Magazine. We had gatherings on Sundays at the Oasis restaurant that started out with about 10 or 12 people. That's when I first met Clifford, maybe within 2 or 3 weeks after airing some of this material. That group eventually grew to 50 or 60. We moved into another place. An organization was formed called Skywatchers, very active, and that culminated with an event at the James A. Little Theater with about 350 people showing up. And things were activated. We went to, at the time, Congressman Udall, and presented a loose leaf book of 6 inches of material saying what was going on. More people are aware of what's happening that you're going to find out about in the next 2 days. It's going to be updated, and I think our mission is to educate ourselves, to not necessarily believe things, what's a direct knowing, what your intuition tell you, as opposed to your mind, although your mind is a tool of your intuition and yourself. Clifford has been a friend, as well as Carol, his wife, for now 12 years. I know him to be a very honorable man. The Carnicom Institute has impeccable goals and missions based on his impeccability. And so I welcome him to the podium here to begin the conference. And thank you again for coming. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Clifford Carnicom. I want to thank each of you for being here today, and that you've chosen to spend your time and energy here. I think we probably have quite a bit of work ahead of us for the next couple of days, if you're willing to be engaged. It's the first time that I have set up anything of this magnitude and this duration and this length with a group of people. You're free to come and go as you please, but if you are here today and tomorrow, I suspect we will be digging in and working pretty hard if you'd be willing to do that. I would like to thank the folks that made this possible here. We're very fortunate to have this room for us for this weekend. I would like to acknowledge Steve viewers. We would not be here without Steve's help. Also, Alan Hutner made that original connection with me to even have the possibility of having access to a venue for us. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of the members of our organization. We are a very small organization. There's no secret about that. And we need help. But we're here. And I'd like to acknowledge those folks that have helped make this organization start and grow to what it is now and has pulled you here. And then also we have quite a group of volunteers here today that have also helped in many important ways. So with that being done, what I'd like to do to start today is we're going to watch revision of a documentary that I made. Many of you may be familiar with the documentary that I made in 2005. That documentary took about 1.5 years of my life and was made with a budget of about $400 and about a 7-year-old computer. But it was done. And that document still holds. That documentary is about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes long. At this point, I have no means to retract a single line within that documentary 6 years ago. I would show that documentary in its entirety today, and my perception of the information in that documentary and understanding of that information would not change in any significant way whatsoever. What we're going to watch today is an offshoot. It is essentially that same documentary, but it is a revision. It will only be about 45 minutes long. And we have this documentary also through a gift. These folks will remain anonymous, but about 3 years ago, this is actually belated, what's going on here. About 3 years ago, when I gave a talk in Los Angeles, I had some folks approach me, and they offered to make a second run on this documentary, to make a shorter version available for the public for those that don't necessarily have the maybe long-winded approach.
Hi, folks. Good morning. Morning, morning. Let's assemble and get started here. I'm Alan Hutner, and I am the host producer of Transitions Radio Magazine, amongst other things, based out of Santa Fe and on 98.1 FM on Sunday mornings, 8 to 11 a.m. on the radio, and also live streaming at www.transradio.com. Thank you. Part of the reason that I'm here is because of the radio and knowing Clifford Carnicom and the Carnicom Institute of late. And I think I want to just tell a little story that's part of the welcome and part of the introduction. In 1999, I was given a cassette tape of an interview that aired on Coast to Coast, which was then hosted by Art Bell with a journalist, William Thomas. And it was about what was then called chemtrails, the aerosol spray, illegal aerosol sprays. That is more Clifford's term for it. And kind of blew my mind. I had this resistance to even believing that something like that is possible. But being a radio journalist, I thought it was appropriate to explore it deeper. And I found my way to Will Thomas, and he ended up doing an interview on the radio show. And again, this goes back to early 1999. I think it was maybe March. And the reason I'm going to interrupt that conversation is this unbelievability of this. And I have a feeling most of you have gone past your resistance. You're not members of the uninitiated to what's happening in terms of modifications and interference to the natural order of things on the planet. We can take the ideas that there are certain toxins in the water, in the soil, in contemporary mass-produced food and agriculture. We know that there is a correlation. There's a correlation between our health and our wellness and what's happening in the environment on those levels. But some of the material you're going to hear today, some of which I know, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, is very difficult to digest if you're a, quote, mainstream person. This is new. Like I said, I don't think this is new to most of you, so I would just suggest to be open and allow the material that's going to be presented over the next 2 days to not be prejudged by whatever the programming and the patterns of our mind and our subconscious is, because we have a tendency to resist things. I happen to know from a number of interviews with Clifford over the years and other people that there is even in me, there's an unbelief that this is real, that this is happening to us individually and to the planet as an entity, Mother Earth. And I know sometimes we go into fear, and then if our health is affected, we've got to deal with the physiology of what's going on. So, and a little later on today, I might speak to the wellness aspects of who you are